Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for today's video, I'm going to be ranking all of the stories that are in Stephen King's fourth short story collection, Everything's Eventual. We recently wrapped up this collection for the Stephen King short story book club. So we wrapped this one up, and then the next one will be Just After Sunset, which will be starting next month in June on the date June 19th. And if you're a Dark Tower fan or a constant reader, that date should be memorable for you. So that'll be fun. Just After Sunset on June 19th. But for today's video, like I said, I'm going to be ranking all of the short stories and a few novellas that are in this collection. And I think for the most part, this isn't my favorite collection, but it's a definite improvement on Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I don't think it's as good as Night Shift and Skeleton Crew. Those collections are very good. But Nightmares and Dreamscapes, most of those stories I did not like. But for this one, while I would say there aren't as much like top tier Stephen King short stories, all of the stories in here are good and are worth reading. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the ranking. So, of course, I'll start from the bottom, my least favorites in the collection, and then work our way up to the top, my favorite in the collection. And I believe, there are 14 stories in here. So starting off with number 14, my least favorite in the collection is All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. So like I mentioned previously, there's not really any bad short stories in here, but this is my least favorite. I would say that this is a good story, though. Not very memorable, but it does have an interesting premise where you've essentially got this guy going around to all of these different bathroom areas, and you know how people like write in bathroom stalls and they write random crap that sometimes like makes no sense, or you're like, this is stupid. Well, he's going around collecting all of those and writing them in a book, and a lot of them are pretty funny, like bathroom type humor, like stupid humor. So that part of the stuff was pretty funny. Overall, though, not very memorable. It was pretty good, but definitely my least favorite in the collection. And for number 13 on my list, I'm going to have to go with The Death of Jack Hamilton, which I know a few people really enjoyed in the short story book club, but for me, one of my least favorites. And the main reason why is because it's like Depression era story. Like it's all about like taking place during the Great Depression and the Prohibition era, like that kind of stuff, like 20s and 30s. I'm not really that much into. And the story itself, it's kind of that weird thing where King kind of like has a narrator who's like telling the story, so like you kind of already know what's going to happen. I don't really like when King does that, and he tends to do that a lot in his short stories. Same deal with this one. So combine that with the fact that it's an era of America where I'm not really that interested in. Really not one of my favorites. Now for number 12, this is definitely going to be an unpopular opinion. A lot of people love this short story, and it even won like a short story award. So very well acclaimed story. However, I think it's pretty overrated. And number 12 is The Man in the Black Suit. Now I understand why people like this one, but for me, it just comes across as goofy. Sometimes King can do like supernatural stuff really well, and it can be pretty creepy. Other times it just comes off as silly and goofy. This one for me was that. I know a lot of people read this one, and it's really about a boy like who finds this person in the woods, and essentially that person turns out to be the devil. And interesting concept, but for me it was just very silly. I know a lot of people think it's creepy, and some of it is, but a lot of it's kind of goofy for me. Not bad. Definitely not a terrible story. It's a lot better than most of the stories in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. but definitely one of my least favorites in this collection. This next story is actually the last story in the collection. It's one of the shorter ones in here too. So for number 11, it'll be Lucky Quarter, which I actually remembered liking a lot more than I did the second time around. I remember this being like a top 5 short story in this collection, but when I got around to it, I was like, you know what? This isn't really one of my favorites. It's kind of forgettable. It's got an interesting premise where you've got this lady who's kind of down on her luck and she's kind of poor, doesn't really make that much money, but she finds, someone gives her this lucky quarter and it's lucky and she starts winning some money. And I don't want to give too much away, but it kind of goes into a direction that's kind of silly and it's very short. So like maybe it would have had more of an impact if it was a bit longer. Overall, definitely not a bad story, but definitely bottom 5 in this collection. And now we're into the top 10 of 14. For number 10, this one might also be unpopular because I know a lot of people love this novella. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I'll let you know why. For number 10, it's The Little Sisters of Illyria, which if you don't know, is actually a Dark Tower novella. And it's kind of weird, like, recommending this to people because it's a prequel to The Gunslinger, so you would think, like, oh, I can read this and it would be a good taste test for the Dark Tower series. Wrong, because not only is it a prequel to book 1, it's also a sequel to book 4, which is a confusing mess, but it makes sense if you've read the series. So basically, if you've read the first 4 Dark Tower books, you can read this one. If not, it'll spoil the crap out of book 4. Overall, it's a pretty good little novella. It's nothing special. Like if I had to pick like my least favorite Dark Tower thing, it would either be this one or Wind Through the Keyhole. Like it's good. Like it's Roland doing Roland type things, which is always good, but it doesn't compare to like the top tier Dark Tower stuff. It's pretty good, but not spectacular. And coming in at number 9 on the list, we have In the Death Room, which is pretty good. It's basically about a guy who I think is like a news reporter who like goes to maybe like a South American country and he ends up being captured and starts being threatened with torture, and it's kind of like his escape. It was pretty good. I liked this one. The creepiness factor was up there for me because I think King does realistic horror very well, like something like Misery or Cujo. So it's kind of in that same vein where it's like this person who has to try to escape. I really liked it. So it's kind of sits somewhere in the middle of this collection for me. Pretty good though. And number 8 on the list, we have The Road Virus Heads North. And this one is also pretty good. It's Stephen King doing a supernatural, but it's kind of vague. Like you don't really know what's going on until the very end. I think King does that pretty well too. It's basically about this guy who stops at this garage sale and buys this painting because it looks pretty ominous. And stuff happens with the painting, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's pretty good. It's got a pretty bleak ending. And yeah, overall, a very thrilling King short story. Really like it. And with number 7, we're getting into the top half of the short stories because I think there's 14 in here. So yeah, top half here, people. Number 7 is Riding the Bullet, which is one of the closing novellas in here. I think it's Riding the Bullet, and then we get Lucky Quarter to end it with. So Riding the Bullet, pretty good Stephen King novella, although there's an aspect of it towards the end which isn't the best. Overall, very good, very creepy. It's basically about this guy trying to hitchhike to this hospital because he finds out that something happened to his mother, so he's trying to hitchhike and someone picks him up. And creepy things ensue, of course. It's very good until it gets to kind of a nuggety part where it's just like, that kind of sucks. But overall, pretty good, pretty good atmosphere, pretty creepy. I really like this one. And for number 6, we get the title novella titled Everything's Eventual. And this one is very good. I believe it's the longest novella in here. I think it clocks in at like slightly less than 100 pages. And it just tells a pretty interesting story about this guy that you're learning about. I can't remember his name, but he's got a weird life, and you're trying to figure out how he's able to live like this. And I don't want to give too much away because it's one of those things where you just kind of have to go into it not knowing a whole lot. But once you get to the end and you realize like why this guy is living the way he is and the ability that he has, it's very interesting. It's very compelling. And I really do like this. Very good. And number 5 on the list, I think this is one of Stephen King's most underrated stories. In fact, many people in the book club did not like this book and put it like at the very bottom of their list. I think it's really good. It's called That Feeling You Can Only Say What It Is in French, which is a fitting title because this story kind of revolves around the idea of deja vu. But of course, Stephen King takes it a step further and makes it very creepy. And just to think about the ending to this and all the implications of it, very creepy. And I really liked this one. I think a lot of people are sleeping on this story. I think it's underrated. Go read it if you haven't. I think it's very good. And for number 4, we have Lunch at the Gotham Cafe. And this one was a very fun one. I think most people would put this in the top 5, at least for people that were in the book club. This is just a very, I would say the second half is better. The first half is all about this guy who's kind of like going through a divorce and he wants to like meet with his wife and they're going to talk about stuff. But basically all of the shenanigans and craziness and chaos ensues in the second half where they're actually there. And again, I don't want to spoil what happens, but it's pretty crazy. That'll make sense if you've read the story. But yeah, it's very good and one of my favorites in the collection. For number 3 on the list, we actually have I have the movie tie-in cover, I think. Yeah, 1408 for number 3. Now, this is kind of an instance where I actually think the movie is slightly better than the novella, but it's actually a pretty good novella. It's basically about this guy who writes all of these sort of like paranormal sightings books, but he doesn't really believe in anything that he writes. He's written like several bestsellers and people just eat him up, but he doesn't actually believe anything. Like he doesn't really believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff, but he decides to visit 1408 because a lot of crazy stuff has happened there. And basically he goes there to like spend the night, which there's been a lot of deaths in that room. And basically the hotel manager's just like, you should not stay in this room. I know you don't like actually believe in this stuff, but you could probably die. And he gets into the room and stuff happens. Read and find out if you want to know more, but it's very good. Like I said, though, the movie I think is slightly better just because you get a bit more time in the actual room and you actually get to like visualize what's happening. But still, the story in the novella is excellent. And my number 2 favorite in the collection is called LT's Theory of Pets. And this one is especially fun because in the audio version of Everything's Eventual, Stephen King narrates some of them, but for this story, it's actually him narrating in front of a live audience, which makes sense because this story is pretty funny and you get everyone's reactions to like all of the stuff that happens. The main core of this is how couples deal with pets and how sometimes, you know, people have favorite pets and pets have favorite owners. And sometimes pets and owners can kind of have similar personality traits, or like once they've been inside each other's lives, like they can be similar or dissimilar in ways. Overall, very funny, very entertaining, kind of a bleak ending, of course, because it's Stephen King, but very funny, very entertaining. And it's one of my, not just one of my favorites in the collection, but probably one of my all-time favorite King short stories. And number 1, my all-time, well, not all-time, but my favorite short story in this collection is actually the very first story in the collection, which is Autopsy Room 4. And probably a top 10, if not at least top 15 or 20 Stephen King short story ever. Like, it's my favorite in the collection, but just one of my all-time favorites. It's awesome. It's a perfect way to start out the collection. It's essentially about a guy who wakes up in a, oh God, what's it called? He wakes up on an autopsy table where people are going to start cutting into him thinking that he's dead, but he's actually alive and like frozen. Which creates a lot of suspense. And it's like a 30-page short story, and basically you're just waiting for it to happen, and you're waiting to see how he's going to get out of this, because like he's alive, but he can't move and he can't really make that many sounds. So it's very tense, and just putting yourself in that situation, which could realistically happen, not likely, but it could happen, is very creepy scenario to think about. And the ending to it is one of my all-time favorite King endings. It's hilarious, it's crazy, it's bonkers, it's awesome. I love this short story, one of my all-time favorites. All right, so that is my ranking for all of the stories in Everything's Eventual. I'll run through the list here. Number 14, All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. 13, The Death of Jack Hamilton. 12, The Man in the Black Suit. 11, Lucky Quarter. 10, The Little Sisters of Illyria. 9, In the Death Room. 8, The Virus Heads North. 7, Riding the Bullet. 6, Everything's Eventual. 5, That Feeling You Can Only Say What It Is in French. 4, Lunch at the Gotham Cafe. 13, 1408. 2, LT's Theory of Pets. And number 1, Autopsy Room 4. So, what did you guys think of my ranking for these short stories? What are your favorites and least favorites in this collection? And also, what do you guys think of this collection overall? I think a lot of people love Night Shift and Skeleton Crew, and some people even really love Nightmares and Dreamscapes. But how do you feel about Everything's Eventual? Is it one of your favorites? Is it one of your least favorites? Or are you kind of like me where it's somewhere in the middle? I want to know, so please leave your comments down below. And of course, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Booker Stormer Discord. I also have my Patreon link down below and my Amazon wish list. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.